Forget everything you think you know about Vikings, the horned helmets. Pure fiction. The noble savage, a romantic myth. The truth is far more terrifying. For 3 centuries, these Scandinavian seafarers were the nightmare of Europe, a force of nature that swept across the continent, leaving a trail of fire, blood, and fear. This is the real story of the Viking Age, an era defined by brutal ambition, relentless warfare, and a society forged in the icy crucible of the North. They emerged from the mists of Scandinavia, a land of long dark winters and short precious summers. Life was harsh, resources were scarce, and the strong ruled. Their society was built on a rigid hierarchy of chieftains, free men, and slaves. Honor was everything, and it was won not through peace, but through plunder and prowess in battle. To die of old age was a disgrace. To die with a sword in your hand was a ticket to Valhalla. This ruthless worldview fueled their expansion, turning farmers and fishermen into the most feared raiders the world had ever seen. The heart of their military might was the longship. These vessels were masterpieces of naval engineering, shallow-drafted, swift, and sturdy. They could navigate treacherous open seas and then sail up shallow rivers, appearing as if from nowhere to strike deep into the heart of unsuspecting kingdoms. A fleet of longships appearing on the horizon was a death sentence. For the monks of Lindisfarne in 793, it was the beginning of the end. Their unprepared monastery was sacked, its treasures stolen, and its inhabitants slaughtered or enslaved. This brutal raid announced the arrival of the Vikings on the world stage, and the Age of Terror had begun. Viking warriors were a terrifying sight, often towering over their European counterparts. They were hardened by a life of physical labor and constant conflict. They fought with a terrifying ferocity, believing their fate was already sealed by the Norns. At the forefront were the legendary berserk warriors who would work themselves into a trance-like fury before battle. Dressed in bear or wolf skins, they would bite their shields, howl like wild animals, and charge into the enemy lines, heedless of their own safety. They were the shock troops of the Viking Age, sowing chaos and panic wherever they went. But it wasn't just the men. Norse society, while patriarchal, granted women more rights than many of their contemporaries. They could own property, inherit land, and initiate divorce. And some, the legendary shield maidens, chose the path of the warrior. Archaeological finds, like the Burka warrior grave, have confirmed that women were buried with full sets of weapons, honored as fighters. These women were not just defending the homestead. They were on the front lines, fighting and dying alongside the men, proving that the Viking fury was not limited by gender. Viking attack strategies were brutally effective, based on speed, surprise, and psychological warfare. They wouldn't engage in pitched battles unless necessary. Their preferred method was the hit-and-run raid. They would land, overwhelm local defenses before a proper response could be mounted, loot everything of value, from gold and silver to cattle and people, and then vanish back to the sea. Their targets were often soft and wealthy, monasteries and coastal towns. They used the terror they inspired as a weapon, ensuring that many would rather pay them off than risk a fight. This protection money, known as the Danegeld, became a crippling tax on kingdoms like England and France. For those caught in a Viking raid, the fate was grim. Resistance was often met with overwhelming violence. Those who weren't killed outright were captured. The strong and healthy were shackled and taken as slaves, or thralls. They were sold in markets from Dublin to Constantinople, their lives reduced to property. Women, in particular, faced a horrifying future. The sagas and chronicles are filled with grim accounts of what happened to captured women, a dark reality of the Viking expansion. For a village in their path, the options were stark: death, enslavement, or flight. There was rarely a third choice. On the battlefield, their fighting style was chaotic and personal. It wasn't about formations and disciplined lines. It was about the shield wall, a brutal, shoving, hacking scrum, where warriors locked shields and fought for their lives. The goal was to break the enemy's wall, creating gaps to exploit. It was a close-quarters nightmare of axes, spears, and swords. The Viking axe, with its long handle and heavy, curved blade, was a particularly feared weapon. capable of splitting a shield, a helmet, and the skull beneath with a single blow. It was warfare at its most primal and visceral. Yet, amidst the bloodshed, they were not one-dimensional monsters. They were also explorers, pushing the boundaries of the known world. They settled Iceland and Greenland in 5 centuries before Columbus. They reached North America, establishing a short-lived settlement at Lonso Meadows in Newfoundland. They were master craftsmen, creating intricate jewelry and beautiful carvings. They were poets, composing epic sagas that tell tales of heroes, gods, and monsters. They were traders and merchants, establishing vast networks that connected Scandinavia with the Byzantine Empire in the Middle East. They were a complex people, raiders and settlers, pagans and, eventually, Christians. Their legacy is etched into the DNA of Europe. They founded cities like Dublin. They gave their name to Normandy in France. The Rus, Vikings who traveled east, laid the foundations for the first Russian state. Their language seeped into English, giving us words like sky, leg, window, and berserk. They reshaped the political map of the continent, forcing kingdoms to centralize their power and build navies to counter the threat from the sea. They were a catalyst for change, a violent storm that, when it finally passed, left behind a new world. So, the next time you see a depiction of a Viking, look past the horned helmet and the cartoonish caricature. Remember the real Vikings. The master shipbuilders, the relentless raiders, the fearless explorers, and the brutal warriors who burst out of the north and, for 3 terrifying centuries, held the world in their grasp. They were a force of history, as unstoppable and as unforgiving as the northern seas they sailed. Thanks for watching. If you want to dive deeper into the gritty realities of history, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Let us know in the comments which historical civilization you want us to uncover next. See you in the next one.